Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us on this episode of Meet the Experts. My name is Jeff Dalrymple, Executive Director of Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. Today, I'm recording this with friends from across the country. I'm in West Palm Beach, Florida, and on the campus of Palm Beach Atlantic. And today, we're really excited to talk about an important, albeit difficult, topic. Treading boldly through a pornographic world. And we've got special guests Daniel Weiss and Josh Glaser, who are going to talk about the issue of pornography. They're both authors and speakers and doing really good ministry in this area. Excited for you to meet both of them here momentarily and hear them present on this topic. And of course, we will take your questions. And so if you're here with us live, we'll have the Slido link in the chat, and we'll just remember that when we're asking questions, I guess that's me, when I'm asking questions, we'll repeat that for the sake of the recording. But it's my privilege to introduce to you our experts today. Daniel Weiss is a writer, speaker, visionary. He is passionate about tackling the tough questions about sexual identity with depth and compassion. He spent 2 decades helping church and community leaders, educators, and policymakers address complex situations surrounding sexual brokenness, and he does so with hope and life-giving truth. We're so thankful for Daniel. He helped start the Brushfires Foundation, which is now Sexual Integrity Leaders, which is designed to equip Christian leaders to foster sexual integrity in our churches and communities. Daniel, this is so very important, and I'm really glad that you're here to talk about this issue with us. Also here with us is Josh Glaser. He's the Executive Director of Regeneration. He and his team equip men and women to live out God's good, holy, and beautiful design for relationships and sexuality. He's the creator of Awaken, which is a 4-part discipleship series for men pursuing sexual integrity, the host of Becoming Whole podcast, and co-author of Treading Boldly Through a Pornographic World, a field guide for parents, and also the topic of Meet the Experts today. You know, I just came out of a child protection training event, and I would say almost on a daily basis, the topic of pornography and the impact of pornography comes up in our work at ECAP. Of course, ECAP exists to help Christian ministries keep kids safe so they can hear the gospel and grow in discipleship. And so it's very timely that we would have Daniel and Josh on the program today to talk about this very important. Well, Daniel and Josh, thanks for the work that you do, and thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us and to talk to our community of Christian ministry leaders across the country on this important topic. Daniel and Josh, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And we're really glad to be here. And we know that you're doing great work in the area of abuse prevention. And I do think this is a parallel issue that interconnects quite a bit with abuse prevention, because pornography is such a part of ongoing abuse and exploitation in our culture. But I'm especially happy to do this with my partner in crime, Josh Glaser. We have not only enjoyed writing the book together, not sure we enjoyed it, but we have enjoyed the friendship that's come of it. So we're happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, my name is Josh Glaser. I lead ministry regeneration, so for the last almost 25 years, I've been walking with men and women, adult men and women, who are wrestling with issues of sexual integrity in their marriages and their lives, questions of sexual identity. And so part of what happened for both Daniel and I, if I could speak for us, was as two guys who were also fathers and working in this field, addressing sexuality issues in this culture. As we looked around at the literature that was written for parents, there's a lot of great stuff out there, but we just felt like there were some missing components that we really wanted to bring into the world. And that launched us into picking up this book and writing it together. So Daniel, did you want to introduce or say anything about what you're doing with sexual integrity?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just think that what you said, seeing that there were gaps, and many of the gaps were surrounding the tougher questions about talking to your about sex and pornography. And we felt like you can't really be effective unless you go into those places that, frankly, most parents are afraid of. And we wanted to create a resource that had a lot of hope and was positive, not just a burden about a very tough topic. So I'm really pleased to introduce it and talk about it today because we wanted to give parents hope and let them know they're the best person to do this job. And so let's get into it, Josh.
Yeah. So everybody, the way we decided to go after this was really because we were going to take advantage of the fact that there were two of us, and we were really just kind of riff off each other because we each brought something different to the book, and we want to kind of highlight that for you. So, Daniel, my first question for you, brother, is if you were to pick one part of the book that you felt like, man, if we can talk about one thing today, what would it be? And this question comes. My dad is he's a foodie, and so when he goes to a restaurant, he loves to ask the waiter or waitress this question. He said, "If I'm just in town one night and I only get one shot at a meal here, what's the meal I should have?" And so it's a great question to get a good meal. But so Daniel, my question for you is, if our book is the menu, what's the one item on the menu that you would want to recommend to somebody?
Yeah, and it's a pretty big menu, Josh. So it's hard to pick.
Yeah, it's a fair question.
We covered a lot, but I do think it's a great question. And I would say, if I had to boil it down to one thing, it is I would hope that parents would grab a hold of this vision of godly sexuality being an intimate, uh, intricate part of who we are as male and female, and that it's such a beautiful, lovely story. We can't help but want to share it with our kids and to educate them and try to steer them away from the counterfeits of our culture that are likely going to hurt them.
So get into that a little bit, because I think for a lot of people, at least in my generation, we grew up and the message about godly sexuality was really sex is great when you're married, but it's bad everywhere else. And so just wait till you're married. Is that the sexual vision you're talking about?
No, that is what I would call an old script. It's what we used to say when well-meaning people shared that message, and certainly protecting kids from early sexual behavior is an important goal even today. We never lose sight of that. But that was an inadequate message in many ways, and so rather than just teaching kids to abstain from sex, we want to teach them what they were made for. That there's something beautiful, godly, and even something deeply tied to the gospel itself in our sexuality, this gift of giving and receiving. And the Bible compares this with the love of God for his people, Israel, in the Old Testament. He also compares it to the love of Christ for his bride, the church. And we see this in Ephesians 5 and Genesis 1 and 2. We see this in Revelation. And we see Jesus referring to himself as the bridegroom. And Paul talking about the church as the bride. So we have all this marital wedding imagery for a reason, that we are meant for connection. We are relational people, but meant for intimate, deep connection as a sign and as a way of partaking in the inner community of God. Not fully, not perfectly, certainly with sin and the fall in the mix, but there's something beautiful and valuable that we need to reclaim. So we want to teach our kids this beautiful vision and help them live toward it, with full knowledge that this is a fallen world and we all make mistakes, we all fall short. And there are things that happen in this world that can be quite damaging and harmful. Being exposed to pornography is one of those harmful things. But we want to walk with them through this story and help them really come into what God has planned for them.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we tried to highlight in the book is how easy it is, I think, for Christian parents, especially ourselves included, because the world is so out of control, so hypersexualized, so sexually distorted, it's so easy when we're raising kids to focus in on what's not working well and to just try to talk about don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, which misses, and this is what you're getting after, which misses that sex wasn't Satan's idea. It wasn't the world's idea.
Right.
It wasn't, it wasn't dreamed up in some dark lair. It was dreamed up by our good and holy God. And there is something good and true and beautiful about his design for sexuality. And the reason that pornography is so bad is because it corrupts something that is so good. I don't remember who I heard this from years ago, but someone once suggested that that which is most glorious, most powerful that God has made, those are the things that actually have the most power to become evil. Like you don't usually see an evil villain in a James Bond movie or in a Star Wars movie who's a little mouse, because they're small and they're not very powerful, they're not very glorious. But the bigger, more glorious something has been designed, the greater capacity it has for destruction when it's contorted. And I think sex is exactly that, which is one of the reasons that pornography and sex trafficking and prostitution, those things are so linked.
Yeah, and I want to say one other thing, Josh. The reason I led with that one distilled nugget, focusing on the positive, I think is because this is a topic that many parents approach with fear and trepidation. And a lot of parents, I mean, we can say this, almost no parents today were given this healthy, robust, scriptural, godly understanding of sex. I mean, many of us are lucky if we ever had a sex talk, and it was usually one time, and our parent, dad or mom might have been fumbling through it and not knowing what to say, or it might have been really awkward. So I think a lot of parents come to this topic with that fear, and I want to flip that and say there is so much hope, there is so much opportunity to influence our kids in one of the most important areas of their life, and which will be important throughout their lives. So I would say that's why we say treading boldly in the title is we're walking with Christ. We bring our fears and our anxieties with us, but Christ is there in the midst of it. Now, before you say something, Josh, I'm going to flip the table on you and say, now, if you had to order one item off this menu and share that and say, this is what I want you to know about this book, what would it be for you?
Yeah, I think you stole. Can we order the same thing? No. I think the other thing that is just, it is throughout the book, and it dovetails actually nicely with what you're just saying, is that there is an opportunity for parents to engage with their kids around the topics of sex and sexuality as a regular part of their parenting. And this is, especially if we didn't receive this is almost counterintuitive, because instinctively we kind of want to push away from it. It's uncomfortable. We're uncomfortable with it. Many of us have our own hangups in the area of sex and sexuality, either things that were done to us that hurt and that we still carry wounds from, or memories that are shameful. Many of us wrestle with our own sexual desires and sexual behaviors. And so how on earth am I going to talk to my kids about these things? We actually spend a whole chapter talking about that, the importance of parents getting after their own stories, at least enough that they can be present and non-anxious in talking with their kids. But the thing off the menu I'd want to highlight in relation to that is, and I do this when I'm talking to audiences too. I'll ask, how many of your parents talked to you about sex when you're growing up, at least once? And maybe about 10% of the room will raise their hand if in a Christian audience. How many of you is a regular, ongoing, healthy conversations with your parents about sex? And usually no hands stay up, or if there are hands that stay up, I think the most I've ever had is maybe 3 people in the room out of 100 that would say, my parents had regular, ongoing, healthy conversations with me about sex. But when I ask them, how many of your parents talked to you a lot growing up over the years about table manners? All the hands go up. What about sports? Many of the hands go up. What about education, homework? Hands go up. And when you think about those things matter, sure. But when you think about the life-giving nature of sex, that literally a brand new eternal soul can enter the world through sex. Sex is more important than sports and homework in that light. When you think about the destruction that contorted or twisted sex can bring, either through abortion or through being sexually violated, or through something like a pornography addiction or extramarital affairs, This is very, very important stuff. And so one of the things we want to talk about, we talk about in the book, and I want to highlight here is how valuable it is to bring this up as a regular part of your ongoing discipleship of your kids. And the crazy thing is, you talk about that one kind of awkward, fumbling conversation that many of us remember having with our parents, if we had any at all. The first time my mom talked to me about sex, I was in college. It was Christmas morning, and we were opening presents, and she, God bless her, she didn't want to let the topic pass completely out of my childhood, but my brothers and I were like, no, mom, it's too late. We're not having that conversation. But the reason it's so awkward and uncomfortable is because we haven't done it, and because we don't do it very often. And so if we begin when our kids are really little, talking to them about just the biology of sex, and a good clue that your kids are ready to talk about sex, they'll always ask, where did I come from? Well, you came from mommy's womb. When they begin asking, well, how did I get in there? That's usually a pretty good sign they're ready for at least a biological conversation. But then if we bring up topics related to desire and sex and our bodies and being a man or being a woman, being a boy or being a girl, romance, relationships as they grow, if that's a regular part of what we're talking about, we get more comfortable with it. So we're not fumbling and as anxious. They don't know the difference because they've never had any other parents to talk to them. So if we start when they're young and just kind of do that regularly, they're kind of like, I guess this is just part of what parents do. And that's what we want for them, because we want to be their number one go-to around questions related to this. One of the things I'd like to tell parents is you want your kids to say to Billy on the playground, that's not what my mama said. You don't want your kids saying to you, well, that's not what Billy told me, or Billy showed me, for that matter. And then as our kids get older, you definitely don't want you want your kids thinking, at least, if not saying to their teachers, that's not what my parents taught me. I know better. You don't want them saying to you as an adult, as a parent of a teenage kid, that's not what my teachers are telling me. We really want to be first, and we want to be frequent with them about these things. And so that's the thing off the menu I'd really want to highlight for parents. And if you're parents and you're watching and you're thinking, well, my kids are already teenagers and I haven't done this, that's okay. You can blame me. You can blame Daniel. Say, hey, I listened to these two goofballs on this webinar today, and they said I should be doing this. And you know what? I think they're right. So we're going to start talking about it, and just bring it up slowly. Pull out our book if you want, and refer to a page and just use that as a conversation starter, just to bring this up and be an advocate for your kids in this area. It was a long answer, Daniel. It was a big meal.
Yeah. You need to take a breather here.
Okay,
No.
jump in.
I think that's a great point. And to the parents that haven't done this, I think one of the things I would emphasize as you're starting to wade into this, ask a lot of questions and listen far more than you speak. Your kids are going to be uncomfortable, especially like Josh said. If they're teenagers, they're going to be like, that time has passed. I don't want to have this. But you need to have it, because they still need guidance, and they still need to come and push against the foundation, the godly foundation that perhaps only you can give. They may not get it at school. They may not get it among even their Christian peers or in their youth group. We know plenty of examples of kids being exposed to pornography in these places. But I would ask them questions that aren't perhaps direct. Say, hey, what do your peers talk? Do your peers ever talk about pornography? What do they talk about? What are you hearing them talk about? Or what are they looking at? And then follow up. How does that make you feel when they have those conversations? Have you been exposed to something? I don't want to be shaming you. I'm just curious what your life is like in this regard, since we haven't talked about it before. And stay curious, and maybe just, especially for the first time, you don't have to instill your values in that moment. Just work on the relationship. And I think that's one of the things that parents feel they have to get the right information out, whether it's about sex, whether it's about, dating, whether it's about pornography. If I just tell them the right things, everything's going to be okay. But we know that's not true. And we still want to give them good information. We want to give them right information. But the way they're going to receive it is if we have a relationship that can bear the weight of some of these uncomfortable conversations. And frankly, where it's just not weird, as Josh said earlier, to bring this up, that there's trust already built. And so if any of those things are lacking, you might work on just better communication and then just sprinkle this in now and again. But don't let it go. Don't go too long without talking about it. And don't always just tiptoe around it. At some point, you want to go deeper and find out what kind of experience and thoughts and attitudes your kids have.
And let me ask you, shifting gears if we could a little bit. One of the things that you brought to the book that I think might be really helpful for a lot of people, it's been helpful for me, is comparing the old script of teaching our kids about purity versus teaching our kids about chastity, and pursuing purity versus pursuing chastity. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think you hit on that. The purity culture taught a kind of binary view of sexuality. You are a virgin or you're not a virgin, and the virginity was stressed. And I share this in the book. I was a virgin. Technically, we had to invent technical virgin through purity culture because I hadn't had intercourse, but I was not pure. I had messed around and been involved sexually in other ways. I had a lustful thought life. And so I was focused even, in my mid 20s, mid to later 20s when I got married. I'm like, yes, I made it. I was a virgin, got married, but hadn't really accounted for all the damage I had done with pornography viewing and casual sexual behavior with others. So let's not think of this as a binary. And unfortunately, the way our kids' minds work, many of them will say, I've blown it. There's no need to keep trying. And so they just, because sex is pleasurable or pornography gives that rush, they'll go into it without that safeguard in place anymore after one step. And so purity itself, purity is great, but it's not enough. And so we decided to bring back that old Roman Catholic word chastity, right? You never hear anyone use that word, but what that really means is a disposition of the heart towards sexual integrity. So we are habituating ourselves more and more to living into what we were made for. So understanding I'm a man, and yes, I have sexual desires, but I want to learn to steward them towards marriage and family as a single man. Or within marriage, I still have to steward my sexual desires because my wife is not an object for me. She's not a plaything. It's a human interaction, and I need to be respectful of her at all times. And there are just times when that's not going to work. So I'm stewarding my sexuality even into my later adult, middle age, and older years because this is so precious. And chastity is something that doesn't end with marriage. That's a point that I think it's really important to tell our kids is we want to act rightly in our sexuality, or at least pursue right thinking, right behavior, even in marriage. And so we're cultivating this habit or this disposition of the heart that is focused on the Lord, and it's focused on sacrifice, not on taking and getting from another. And again, that's something we can be on the same journey with our kids in the journey of chastity. So it's not just something they're doing, it's something we're doing together as a family. And, frankly, learning from our mistakes, confessing, repenting, and moving on by God's grace.
I think about that. Two things about that. It shifts the conversation from this kind of unique world of just talking about sex to talking about love and becoming people who learn to love well with our bodies in all places of our life. And the other thing, just to piggyback what you're saying, I was talking to a dad who, in approaching his son this way, his 13-year-old son who was wrestling with masturbation, wrestling with pornography, he talked to his son about it, thinking about, okay, if the goal is chastity, then this is something he's going to grow into. Then he gave him the comparison, and this isn't original to him. I think others have used this. Robert Bishop Barron, Christopher West, I've heard this from both of them too. This idea of if you want to have a great golf swing, you need to practice. If you want to become a great piano player, you need to practice. And the person who practices their golf swing or practices at the piano ends up being more free than the person who just sits down at the piano and bangs on the keys, or who just picks up a golf swing and swings it however they please to begin with. And so for this 13-year-old son who was feeling like he wasn't very free in the area of sexuality, his dad was able to say to him, yeah, you're not very free right now because you're just learning. And so we want to help you to learn. So this is something you'll grow into as you practice and as you grow in chastity, which was a relief to his son to hear. He hadn't lost it. He was on the beginning of this journey, not kind of over the edge, so to speak. So, yeah.
Right. That's such a great point. But hey, Josh, there's other kind of old ways of doing things. I'd love for you to talk about the idea of rules versus process. So a lot of one of the most common things parents will bring up is, how do I lock down the internet?
Yeah.
How do I shut off access? How do I keep my kids from looking at porn? And so there's this really intense focus on rules and technology and software, but it's about a lot more than that, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think we are the first, and we write about this in the book. This is really the first wave of parents raising kids in a culture that's both sexually saturated. We're not the first culture to raise kids in that situation. First century Greece and Rome, when the early church was growing, was that kind of culture. But we are the first generation to do that in that kind of culture that is also digitally connected. And so we really are in a phase that's kind of frightening for parents. Like most parents don't know their kids' digital devices as well as their kids do. And so it can be very tempting to say, well, let's just, set the filters up. Let's set up screen time. Let's put some really strict rules around all those things. And then my kids won't struggle. Or if they do struggle, then they'll stop. And that, first of all, just doesn't work that way. There is no way to batten down all the hatches. This is a sad but real reality for our kids today. If it's not on their own devices or in devices in your home, if it's not messages they're hearing at home, they will encounter them somewhere else. And if you are fortunate enough to shelter your kids from all exposure to pornographic ideas and images while they're in your home, the day they leave, they're going to run into something. And so our best efforts at just creating rules for them aren't going to work. We really want to instill these things in their hearts, and that won't happen outside of relationship. And so an over focus on rules, and I say over because we do need rules, and an over focus on technological tools. I say over focus because we do need those also. An over focus on those things misses the heart, and relationship with our kids is really where that kind of chastity growth is going to happen. And so in the realm of relationship, we want to think about having those ongoing conversations. We want to think about doing more listening than we do talking at our kids. The crazy thing about the heart, and every parent knows this who's got kids who are kind of beyond the brainwashing stage, and I say that a little tongue in cheek, but when they're little, we can say, yeah, we're Christians, and so we do things this way. But at some point, especially early adolescence and beyond, their hearts become a place that they become aware of, and they have an inner life that we cannot pull out of them against their will. And so to draw them out, to woo that part of their heart out, we need to show ourselves relationally to be trustworthy, to be safe, to care more about them than we do about our own comfort. And I say that I'm talking to myself right there. Like when I come home after a hard day's work and my kids are making noise because they had a hard day, and I just want them to be quiet because I had a hard day, then I'm shutting down an opportunity to connect with their hearts, which brings us right back to my own journey of chastity, my own journey of needing to become a person who loves better. So some of the things we recommend in the book are asking open-ended questions and listening, asking questions just to get to know where our kid is, not to set them up to be able to kind of, knock down their faulty views. Trusting the process ourselves, that it's okay to have a conversation that is undone, where our child walks away feeling heard, even though what they're walking away with from their perspective is not the full truth, because we can come back later and share more of that truth. And this is especially, I think, important for kids who are already wrestling on some level with pornography or already wrestling on some level with their sexuality. Because what happens often for a kid who's either been discovered to be viewing pornography, or they've taken the bold step of disclosing to mom or dad that this is something they're dealing with, or that something happened at school, all those things. If our adult size internal reactions kind of kick up and we come at our kids that way, then what they'll learn is that we're not safe to talk to. And so the other stuff that they haven't yet shared will become something they'll carry on their own. And I've heard so many stories from adult men and women who have experienced just that when they were growing up. They shared something with their mom or dad, or their mom and dad found just a sliver of the full story, but their reaction, the mom or dad's reaction, showed the kid, like, I cannot tell them the whole truth because, man, they reacted that way to that. I'm in trouble if I share more. And so we really want to learn to regulate our own emotional responses, recognizing that the little bit we know about what's happening in our kid's heart really may be just the tip of the iceberg. One of the mantras I like to share with parents, and myself included, is that when we learn bad news about something our kid's dealing with, what we have learned is bad news, but that we have learned is really, really good news. And we have to trust that even being able to bring that into the light for our kids is going to be a healing avenue for them. Daniel, anything else you'd add to that?
Well, no, that's such a great point. But I was wondering, Jeff, if any questions had come in, we can continue to talk about some different aspects, but I want to make sure we catch any questions that came in from the audience.
This is such a great conversation. I really appreciate both of you. Even as I'm listening to you talk and go back and forth, there's wonderful parenting principles, even like Josh, what you're just sharing there about having a measured response and not overreacting is so healthy to it's just good parenting advice. The other piece that I also really appreciate about your perspective is the hope of the gospel, right? That every human being is created for the purpose of worship. We're created in God's image. Genesis 3 happened. We have the fall. What we're seeing here is this kind of perversion of something beautiful that God's created. And it's the gospel really that reorients our thinking, including our sexuality, back to what it was originally designed to do. And so I just really appreciate the conversation and just this perspective that you have coming at it from a gospel-centered biblical perspective. We do have a number of questions, and let's just jump into it because I don't think we're going to be able to get to them all. But here's my first question, and either one of you just take this and run with it. But first of all, where do you see well-intentioned Christians go wrong when it comes to pornography? Maybe you could give a couple more. You've mentioned some already, like even that measured response. But where do you typically see well-intentioned Christian parents go wrong on this topic?
Yeah, let me jump in real quick. The number one place is I think that parents underestimate the difference between kids growing up in a digital age and those of us who remember the pre-digital age. The internet is by far the number one go-to for all questions related to truth today. So our kids growing up will have natural questions about sex and sexuality, including their own bodies, the bodies of the other sex, what desire means. And so we can assume that outside of us, if we're not having these conversations, their go-to will be the internet. And the internet will both share faulty information with them and also faulty images with them, videos with them. And so that's where it gets really, really dangerous. And so, again, when our kids are exposed to pornography, and sometimes we really have to assume they were looking for something good, important, normal, and they got sucked into something that was not their fault. And so we want to help to get into those deeper things of what they're looking for. That's the quick answer I give to the well-intentioned but faulty perspective.
We're also seeing the same generation asking parenting questions of Google, right?
Yes.
So that's a whole new level too. Where do I go for my parenting questions? Well, just Google search, right?
Yeah.
Versus, my generation wants to be a part of a church and to have mentors in our lives that could speak into parenting challenges. Here's another question. Maybe Daniel, you want to take this, but how can we create a culture in our families, churches, and ministries where sexual immorality is taken seriously as a sin, but people are not ashamed to seek help, healing, and change if they're battling against it?
A great question.
Yeah, and I think let me just, before I answer that, I just want to say one thing on Josh's question, because so many parents will say this overtly out loud, or think it. My kid would not be the kind of kid to go look for porn. And we say, think about it differently. It's not whether your kid would go looking for porn, but as your kid's on the internet, do you trust the internet to not expose your kid to everything that's out there? And the truth is, pornographers have loaded the internet with all kinds of keyword misspells, hyperlinks, pop-ups. I know that we have pop-up blockers and ad blockers and stuff, but they have found ways to get this through to kids. It's their primary goal, really, is to get kids hooked young. So, and on top of that, that's not even an accurate perception. We did cite some research in the book that a British study of parents and teens, 75% of parents thought their kids had not looked at pornography. 75% of their teenagers had not looked at pornography, and half of those kids had. So half of the parents were completely unaware that their kids had already been looking at pornography. And so that's the thing. It's just a different age. We can't count on even the moral guidelines we've given our kids. It's a different animal with the internet, and we can't trust the internet to be following our moral family guidelines. But setting up that culture, I think the big part of that is to normalize conversations about sexuality as much as possible. And even, my family, my wife and I, and one of my daughters really like to watch football. Well, there's not only cheerleaders that they cut to every time they go to a commercial break that usually aren't dressed very well. There's also the ads. And so we either turn it off or talk about it. Say, that's just not presenting this woman as a whole person. You're only getting to focus on her body. And so having those normalizing conversations is a key part of this. We always want to hold up the best when it comes to sexual integrity and what we were created for. But at the same time, we have to, it's almost like the other side of the coin. We have to talk very openly about the fact that, as Solzhenitsyn said, the dividing line between good and evil runs through every human heart. And the fact is, we can say to our kids, I did not live my life the way I wish I had. I can tell them that I was sexually active. I'm not telling them details. I'm not telling them with whom. But I can say that was a stain on my soul. And it was something that I took away from my future wife. That was hers, rightly, in a godly way. So we don't want to shame people, because shame is a key factor in putting kids and adults back into that addiction cycle or that addictive cycle. Shame leads us to seek out something to make us feel better when we feel bad inside. But I think just understanding we are all fallen. And when we look at the culture, even the criminal, the exploitative, the abusive stuff, it's fallen, hurting people that are committing these crimes and these abuses. And God is here to heal all of us if we would turn to him. And so I think just a realistic understanding of God's design, fall of man, and God's desire for redemption, and that he has never rejected us, and he will walk with us through this because he loves us that much.
And Jeff, if I could give just a shameless plug for Daniel's organization, Sexual Integrity Leaders, it's a growing movement of people who that is the exact question they're trying to answer. How can we become gospel-centered churches and Christians who are addressing these topics with both grace and truth? So whoever asked the question, check out Sexual Integrity Leaders and get plugged in there. It'll be a good resource for you and your church going forward.
That's fantastic. Love to know about those resources. What's the website for that?
Sexualintegrityleaders.com.
Sexualleadersintegrity.com. Great. All right, here's our next question. Why do you think parents are scared to talk to their kids about sexuality? What is the first step to take if you're scared but you want to start this conversation with your children.
Yeah, what a great question. And we're all there. I talk about this for a living, and my one of my daughters, my youngest daughter, just a couple months ago, one of her older siblings mentioned the word sex in the kitchen, and we've talked to her about what sex is. And she asked, I think she was 7 or 8 at the time, she said, "Wait, what's sex again?" And this is coming from me. My knee-jerk response was, "Ask your mother." So I think we're all there. I think
Is that wrong? Is that a wrong answer? Is that what you're saying?
not necessarily, but well, here's why it's not the most helpful answer, because the internet would never say ask your mother. And so come the day that dad's around and mom's not, or dad's the right guy for the question, I don't want her thinking your dad always sends me to talk to mom. So a better answer would have been, because I was on my heels, would have been, that is a great question. Give me 5 minutes. Or that's a great question. Let's me and mom talk about that a little bit. So I think there are two reasons that I think typically parents don't want to talk. One is because our own sexual taintedness, distortions, our own struggles in that area. I think that was, if I dig deep enough, that's what was underneath my response to my daughter in that moment. Like, how do I talk to her about something so sacred in this moment? And so whenever we've got our own kind of stuff that's in the way, our past, our present, our own sexual relationship with our spouse, that's not healthy, it just becomes really difficult to talk to our kids. Also, I think related to that is a lot of us, especially when our kids are young, we have the faulty idea that to talk to our kids about sex is somehow going to taint them, which reveals again our own kind of, beginning in Genesis 3 with the fall, rather than Genesis 1 and 2 with God's good, very good creation of man and woman. And so I think we just kind of need to continue to work through our own stuff. I don't mean that we get all healed and whole in this area of our lives before we talk to our kids, but recognizing that we're working on those parts of our own life can help us to be more at ease with our kids. Daniel, what would you say to that question about why it's hard for kids?
I think for a parent that's struggling, I would say it's kind of the pat Christian answer: pray about it, but pray very specifically, bringing this fear or this anxiety before the Lord and asking Him to reveal what's behind it. And then to think through, are there things in my past that may be a barrier for me wanting to? Am I afraid something's going to come up? And how do I deal with that? And I think the Lord is so tender with us. He's not there to crush us. He doesn't, the bruised reed He does not break, and He doesn't quench the burning wick. I mean, He is so tender with us as parents because we're still His children, and He wants to guide us as well. And it might be really advantageous and helpful to talk things through if you've got a trusted friend, a trusted Christian friend or pastor, and just to say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this, and I'm not sure why. Can you walk with me a little bit? Can you talk with me a little bit, and ask some questions to help me get behind it, or get what's behind this?" But recognize you're not alone. And like Josh said, everyone goes through it. That's part of the fall, but we don't have to be stuck in that fallen state. God is there to guide us through.
Yeah, it makes me think of something we've been teaching my kids. I've got kids 18 through 11 right now, and 3 of those in the house. And we've been trying to teach our kids that the difference between a believer and a non-believer isn't perfection, right? It's repentance. And I think that's really, really key. And it makes me think of as I hear you talking and sharing and answering that question, the difference there is not having it all together, but actually the authentic Christianity, the authentic following Christ, is being open and honest, age appropriately, and all the other qualifications there, being honest about our own struggles and recognizing this is another gospel opportunity for us, and then a gospel conversation with our kids, and encouragement and the real example that they can see, that can give them hope in their own struggles. By the way, my special needs daughter, who's 16, she doesn't say sex, she calls it science. So she says they're doing science. So, but this next question that I've got is, what advice, this is related, I think it flows nicely out of what we're talking about here. What advice do you give a single parent, right? We have so many broken marriages, single parents, blended families. What advice can you give to a single parent who have to have these conversations with children of the opposite gender, right? A single dad and his daughter, or a single mom with her son?
Man,
Well,
what a great question.
let me jump in on that one. We can just recognize that's difficult. But in my home, I was the primary sex educator. I had the training, the subject matter expertise, and I have 4 daughters. So they got it from dad. Now, I'm absolutely certain they've gone to mom about things and not me that are appropriate, because a woman would know and I would not. But when it comes to because a lot of it is about just loving well, about respect, about understanding how your body works, understanding desire, how to steward that. You can do that. And I can listen, when you live in a house with 5 women, um, you talk about women's stuff. So, dad, I'm fully on board. I can go to the store and buy tampons. I'm in that female culture in my home, and they're not necessarily shy about talking about, you know, monthly cycles and things like that. So there's a pretty healthy, in a lot of ways, openness in my home, and I think you can do that in a not creepy way as a dad to a daughter or as a mom to a son, simply because we go back to discipleship and stewardship. God made you this way. There's nothing weird or wrong about that. I just want to help you understand that and move forward well. Um, but I think where the challenge is, and I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and a mom came up and said she and her husband were divorced, and he did not share her views on sexuality. She's trying to raise sons in a godly way and was really at a loss. And I told her, you may not be able to impact what your husband is saying to them, but you can impact them when they're with you, and you can keep teaching them good, right, healthy, true, beautiful, and let them see and experience, unfortunately, what some of the counterfeits are. And that's a long road. That's a long term view that you're taking at that stage. It's not going to be a quick fix, and a lot of parents are in that, and we certainly recognize and that's another part of the fall that we just have to encounter and work through.
The other thing, I grew up with a single mom. I think just a couple real quickly. Let your focus, if you're a single mom or dad raising a child of the opposite sex, let your focus be on becoming as comfortable as you can. So what do you need to do to become comfortable with talking to your son, if you're a single mom, about his changing body, for example, in appropriate ways? And you might want to find a trusted man in your life, a brother, a pastor, somebody who you can just bounce ideas off of, who can share with you some of what's normal, and then when you don't know what to say, and or there's a question that comes up and you don't know, just tell your son that, like, I'm a woman. I've never encountered that before. I mean, that's what Daniel and I both say to our daughters. Like, yeah, I've never had a period before. But let me find out. Let me talk to someone I trust, and I won't. I'll protect your confidentiality. But let me get back to you on that. And then make sure you get back to him on that. I think your comfort and being a safe person for him to go to will be a refuge. Daniel, what's that study, if you can think of it? There's a study that's, I think, so encouraging to parents, that compares the number of, or the percentage of parents who believe their kids don't want to hear from them about these things, and the percentage of kids who would really prefer to talk to their parents about these matters. Do you remember what that study was?
That one's not ringing a bell. I do know that we cite an MTV study back in the 90s or the 2000s that found that even the MTV generation, which, gosh, that really dates me. The MTV generation that was growing up on videos and sexualized videos and things, they trusted their parents for information more than anyone else, even MTV. So there is this need and there is a desire our kids have, even in homes where there's a lot of tension, relational stress as kids are in their adolescence and finding their way forward and testing the boundaries. And there can be a lot of anxiety and challenge, but Josh, you used this analogy. It's like a kid in a swimming pool. They can swim around and paddle around, but at some point they want to come back to the edge and rest and hold on. And that's the role the parent has, is to be that steady foundational piece that can continue to offer them that safe haven. So, that's our role as parents doesn't really end even when our kids are out of the house. They still see us that way. I still talk to my parents about advice and counsel on things because they're my parents and that's how I grew up and they were in that role. So we can always have that role with our kids too.
All right, we got to move into more of a lightning round here because we're not going to get to all of our questions, but kind of along the same lines here. It's a little bit of a path. But I just wonder, what's the role of the church and maybe a youth pastor in these conversations? Like, is there a way that they can be helpful? Can they have some of those conversations? Yeah. And what does equipping look like for a youth pastor to influence parents on this topic?
Yeah, two lightning round. I'll give you two answers. One is equip parents. If you're a youth pastor, figure out how your church can equip parents. And secondly, teach theology of the body. It is so needed in this generation.
All right, that's great. Thank you. Here's a question. How do you recommend bringing a spouse from avoiding this topic to accepting it? And maybe they see from their past, sex as dirty based on previous experience or something like that. How would you suggest influencing a spouse towards a healthy view of sexuality and this topic of addressing pornography?
Well, one of the things when we wrote the book Treading Boldly is we wrapped up each chapter with a number of questions that were both about the content, but then how the content was impacting the reader personally. And we did that for that very reason, that a lot of what we shared was going to be brand new for people, even those that had grown up in the church. And so it does take time to process that. I would love it if parents could get together in groups and read this book together, just only to understand not everyone around me has it together. They're questioning and struggling too. And there's actually a relief in that that can bolster courage. You don't have to perform to what you expect other people to be at. They can be human with you, and you can then find answers together. I think is one way I would approach it. Josh, do you have a thought?
No, that's good.
All right, let's say someone's watching right now and they are just really struggling. They've had a long addiction to pornography. What's the first step? What hope? Where do you direct them? What can they do?
Yeah, first step is a hard step, but tell somebody. You need to find a trusted Christian who you can open up to about it. Shame, as Daniel mentioned earlier, is one of the number one reasons that these things begin and they persist. And so the antidote to shame is experiencing the loving, gracious acceptance in the face of another person. Our ministry, regenerationministries.org, is one place that people can do that. We have coaches here that would be happy to walk with you if that's what you're doing. It's a confidential experience. But yeah, that would be the lightning round quick answer to that. And that's without my experience. I remember the first time I told somebody who I was dealing with, I was so scared, but it was one of the best moves I've ever made in my life.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk more about that. What tools and resources? We know we can find this book, Treading Boldly Through a Pornographic World, a field guide for parents, on Amazon. What other resources and tools are out there that either ministry leaders, parents, or even someone struggling with pornography addiction can turn to? What would you share?
Yeah,
I think.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Go ahead,
Yep.
Josh. Well, I was going to plug you again, but you kind of handled that. I think Regen is a great ministry. Are there other kind of recovery groups that you would
Yeah.
point people to as well?
Yeah. So Regeneration Ministries is our ministry, regenerationministries.org. There's also, I highly recommend Jay Stringer's work. You can check out his book, Unwanted, How Our Sexual Brokenness Reveals the Way to Healing. And he's got a corresponding course called the Journey Course. All of these things are meant to take place in community, but those are two good places to start. If you're a man, Drew Boa is another person I'd highly recommend. He's got a community called the Husband Material Community. You can Google that. I think it's husbandmaterial.com, and he does some great work as well. And then, of course, a lot of churches these days are using two different recovery resources. One is Celebrate Recovery. A lot of those groups have groups for men and for women who are wrestling with sexual integrity issues. And then there's another growing church-based ministry ironically called Regeneration Recovery, not affiliated with us, but it's also doing a lot of good work in churches. So those would be 5 places that I'd strongly recommend.
Yeah, and I'm familiar also with groups like Pure Desire. That's
Of course.
a big name. And then Be Broken. And one other thing that people may not know of is for folks that are really struggling with an addiction, Boulder Recovery, Boulder, like the city of Boulder, Boulder Recovery is a Christian 2-week intensive recovery program. So it's not a full month like a lot of the really intensive ones, and it's not a weekend. It's a good in between, and it's all about just kind of understanding and redeeming and reclaiming through handling that addiction. And they do really good work up there in Colorado as well.
This is super helpful. I want to put Brigham on the spot and ask for his help to capture all of these so that we can create just more resources on our website. We get these kind of questions all the time. We, as Bible-believing, gospel-loving Christians, love to be able to come to this topic from our biblical Christian worldview with the hope of the gospel. Of course, what we do at ECAP is we've established child safety standards for child protection. And so I would be remiss not to mention, we're talking a lot here about pornography and sexual purity, but obviously there is a different category when we talk about child pornography, which is illegal and is in a different category, if you will. Can one of you touch on that topic? Any comments that you'd say about child pornography in particular?
Well, there was some study done probably about 15 years ago by the Internet Watch Foundation, and they released a report that they believed 20% of pornographic images online were of minors. So it's a larger problem. It's not as hidden as maybe it once was before the internet. And even the porn hubs and the Pornhub's been in a lot of trouble because they've had rape, abuse, and child pornography videos, child abuse videos on their platform and knowingly kept them on. So that child pornography has been sadly mainstreamed, a little bit under the radar, but certainly with the rise of the porn is found in categories, and teen is one of the most popular. So they're promoting this kind of young look. And it's a lot of folks that aren't pedophiles, clinically speaking, are being drawn into this younger and younger thing. So it's definitely something to be careful about.
Well, this has been great. So much more to share and so much, many great resources out there, but we want to keep this conversation going. So we will capture these resources. Would love to get a copy of your field guide in the hands of some of our ministries so we can have some offline conversations about what that would take. But really appreciate you both, Daniel and Josh, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us. We're going to, of course, make this recording available on our YouTube channel and be able to share it far and wide through social media and other communication features. So thank you so much for taking time. to be with us. We're so grateful for your ministry, grateful for your gospel-centered material and perspective with the hope and healing that we have in Christ. And so really just so thankful for you and this partnership that we have in helping Christians get this right. Honestly, as we at ECAP talk so frequently about keeping kids safe for the sake of the gospel and discipleship, honestly, a lot of those prevention measures start with personal holiness, start with relationship with Christ, and continue as we seek to be faithful in following Christ in our own lives. Honestly, that's one of the best places we can start in keeping kids safe. Well, again, my name is Jeff Dalrymple, and this has been Meet the Experts. We've been talking about pornography use and helping parents on a very sensitive subject, and really, really thankful for Daniel Weiss and Josh Glaser and their ministries and the work that they do. I hope that you'll go check out their website, sexualintegrityleaders.com. And I don't want to mess that up. Not regenerationministries.org. Is that the other one?
Nope, that's us. That's us.
Okay, regenerationministries.org. So be sure to check out their organizations, the tools and resources that they have available. It's been great to be with you all. This is a fun series, Meet the Experts. We always learn so much from great partners and organizations doing good work. Of course, we're here to serve the local church. We at Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention come alongside of Christian ministries to help them get child protection and abuse prevention right, so that kids can hear the gospel and to grow in discipleship. So thank you so much for being with us today. Be sure to check out our website at ecap.net. All right, God bless. Bye-bye.